Okay, welcome everyone. This is on pilgrimage, stories from the Pilgrim's Road. This, as you probably, some of you may be aware, is the fifth in a series of six monthly discussions and conversations about pilgrimage. We're doing it in collaboration with the World Trails Network. Unfortunately, Laura Aziz, who's usually represents the World Trails Network and is brilliant at doing summations and things like that, she's unable to come because she's enjoying a holiday in Ireland at the moment. So we're the good news is that my colleague Annemarie is joining us, and Annemarie Lopez will also be doing some translation on behalf of our guest Rita Dibb. Um, what I'm going to ask each of our guests to do first, however, is to introduce themselves, just 1 to 2 minutes introduction from each of them, and then we'll get straight on. And the running order is going to be Alexandra Huddleston, followed by Rita Dibb, followed by John, aka better known as Peter Naismith. So after they've done their short presentations, we're going to have a bit of a discussion between them, and then we're going to open it up to you all. And please don't be shy. Do put some questions in the chat, and we'll come to you and invite you to ask the question in person. The other thing is that Annemarie then has to take over the mantle from Laura, where I suddenly praised Laura's ability to do summations. So Annemarie will be doing the summation at the end. And we give each of the presenters the last word, and then we'll close, and we'll aim to close by 8:30 my time. So I don't know what that is for everyone else, but we try not to run beyond 90 minutes. Anyway, okay. Alexandra, would you like to be the first to introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name is Alexandra Huddleston. It's great to be part of this talk today. I'm a photographer, writer, and walking artist. And through my photography and writing, I work to revive ways of understanding landscape and culture that have been forgotten in this era where we are so surrounded by climate control, motorization, and the virtual world. So I've walked 3 month-long pilgrimages, the Camino Frances of the Camino de Santiago, that's the route most people know, the Shikoku pilgrimage in Japan, and the Chemin de Puy of the Camino in France. So I'll be talking today about how these journeys transformed me and also transformed my photography.
Great, thank you very much. So Rita.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Alors, je m'appelle Rida Dib, je suis un artiste marcheur et je vis à Paris. Depuis plus de 15 ans, je marche pour comprendre comment un corps laisse une trace. J'ai longtemps pensé qu'il fallait marcher avant et écrire ensuite. Aujourd'hui, je vois les choses autrement. Je pense que le corps écrit avant moi, il écrit par l'effort, par le souffle et par le battement. Le texte vient après. Il n'invente pas la marche, il vient après. Il s'inscrit après. La question que j'aimerais poser ce soir est, quand un chemin devient une histoire, que devons-nous au corps? Après une traversée, les images, les mots et avant les archives. Je vous présente après une vidéo de 5 minutes qui s'appelle Ce que le corps paie. Merci Anne-Marie. À toi.
Okay. My name is Rita Dibb. I'm translating for Rita. I'm a walking artist based in Paris for over 15 years, and I have been walking to understand how the body leaves a trace. For a long time, I thought one had to walk first and write afterwards. Today, I see things differently. I believe that the body writes before I do. It writes through effort, through breath, through heartbeat, and the text comes later. It does not invent the walk. It learns to read what the body has already inscribed. The question I would like to ask this evening is this: when a path becomes a story, what do we owe to the body that has been crossed with images before words and before archives? I leave you now with this he will leave you with a 5-minute video, which you'll be pleased to know is actually in English. It is called Ce que le corps paye, what the body pays.
Great. Thank you so much, Rita, and thank you, Anne-Marie. And Peter.
Right. Hello. Very nice to be here. Thanks for getting me in. My name is Peter Naismith, not John. And my computer is called John, though. So that's the reason. um, I am a writer, a former photographer, and a specialist on the Caucasus region. I've been going to Georgia for 38 years now. And I live 6 months of the year there. I started a bookshop there. I started a small charity there. Then I started a larger charity called the National Trust of Georgia, which is connected to the National Trust here in the UK. And we've done quite a few projects. But the most relevant thing for us here today is that I'm the author of a walking guide to Georgia. In fact, the only walking guide to Georgia, to my knowledge. And it's now just had my book launch for the fourth edition, which we had in Tbilisi, and we had an event in UCL here in London just before. So as you can see, I'm quite fanatical about the Caucasus. I love them, and I walk there frequently. In fact, I've just come back. So I'll stop right there, and I have fascinating number of questions already for our two other speakers, just from what they've said. So over to you.
All right. So first off, thank you very much, Peter. So first off, we're going to start with Alexandra. So Alexandra, do you want to share your screen? And I'll just ask people to make sure that they're muted while Alexandra's presenting.
So over the last few months, I've really been enjoying this pilgrimage seminar, and I'm really happy to be here as a speaker today. In the course of my 3 pilgrimages, I met a lot of people who seem to feel that photography and pilgrimage are incompatible. And in fact, that it's better to leave your camera at home because photographing somehow detracted from the authentic pilgrimage experience. And I want to push back on that idea a bit during this presentation. Pilgrimage, walking or otherwise, is a major ritual process. And at the root of ritual action is a belief that by enacting a particular physical process in a particular place and time will lead to an inner change. In the case of my 3 pilgrimages, they did in fact lead to a big inner change, a shift in my consciousness towards landscape. And as such, they were very, very successful rituals. They taught me an entirely new way of looking at and valuing landscape, as well as a new way of depicting it photographically. And in fact, they changed me from being a documentary photographer to a walking artist photographer. When I began my first pilgrimage on the Camino, I began as a journalist. Those are my feet, by the way. Some of you may recognize this kind of thing. And I wanted to learn why, very journalistic question, in this era of declining church attendance, 250,000 people a year were walking to Compostela each year. However, by the end of that pilgrimage, I wasn't interested in this sociological question anymore. Instead, I had become fascinated by how extensive walking had transformed my understanding and perception of landscapes, and also was transforming how I was depicting them photographically. So how did this happen? How did these walking pilgrimages change my relationship with the natural world and correspondingly change my photography? The first step in this process, I would argue, is an intensifying of the physical experience of the natural world due to walking. For example, if you've been walking under the hot sun for hours without shade, as too many of us are experiencing now, the shade of a tree will affect you intensely, both physically and mentally. And moreover, as the importance of the elements of the physical world increase for the human body, of course, they're going to also increase for the artist, body and mind. a tree that I would never have noticed before would suddenly consume me as an important and meaningful subject for my camera, or in some cases, the cool interior of a cafe. This is why I believe it was so essential that I was photographing throughout all three pilgrimages, because as I kept walking, I kept photographing, and as such, not only I, Alexandra, changed, but Alexandra, the photographer and artist, changed as well through the ritual of pilgrimage. The transformation in my perception and relationship to the natural world impacted my body, my mind, and my photography. As an interesting aside, I will add that there are rituals throughout the world that use the arts in the process of spiritual transformation. Just one example is the Sufi whirling dervishes. So why not then photography? Another type of transformation that occurred was a growing tendency to see the landscape around me as a place full of symbols and full of hidden messages. This symbolic way of relating to our environments is much more akin to a pre-modern way of understanding land than a modern way. I'm not saying no one in the modern world understands it that way, but I certainly did not understand landscape that way before my pilgrimages. So I'm going to speak about some examples from the Camino because most of you are familiar with it, but these black and white pictures are actually from Shikoku because the same phenomenon is evident there. The Camino de Santiago is arguably a separate psychic space that happens to be about 3 meters long and 800 kilometers wide, depending on your route, of course. There are very specific things in the pilgrim landscape. First and most important of all, of course, is the pilgrim path, which in some cases is centuries old. Moreover, the history of the path and the marks along it are constantly evident as you walk it. Piles of stones, signs showing the right or wrong way in which to walk, little crosses made out of straw, bridges, fountains, churches, all made for and often by the pilgrims. As such, the potential symbolism of the landscape is constantly in front of you in a direct and even a didactic way. Walking this didactic landscape allowed me to see landscape in a whole different way. It particularly allowed me to see the land's layered meanings and its histories. And by my last pilgrimage, I didn't need an object as obvious as a cross or a jizo to invoke a story or a feeling. A feather or a popped balloon had become just as heavy and redolent with meaning for me. To conclude, I'll read a journal entry that describes a particularly important moment of transformation that happened to me on October 10, 2010 on the Shikoku Ohenro in Japan between temples 52 and 53. I took a break once the suburbs gave way to more open fields, and I saw a small temple amid a field of rice ready for harvest. As I was changing my socks, the priest came out to talk to me, asking my nationality and giving me a bottle of cold water as osetai. He asked if I was Christian and if I chanted. I said yes to both and explained that I found worthwhile things in all religions. He then asked if I wanted to pray in the temple. So I put on my pilgrim bag, washed my hands, rang the gong, and put my name slip and 5 yen in the offertory box, slipped off my shoes and sat before the altar. I thought I was just going to pray by myself, but he wanted me to pray with him. He put on his stone rosary over his everyday clothes and began to chant. At first, I didn't recognize the phrases, but then I heard the beginning of the Heart Sutra. He chanted powerfully and fast, confidently, and accompanied himself on a drum. In truth, it was startling and marvelous. If the sutras are a rhythm that can decipher or illuminate the patterns of the universe, then there is a depth and power in them that I'm only now glimpsing. Does this beautiful, calm morning after the rains of drying haystacks, herons, and crows in suburbs truly contain this level of power? Amazing. I never imagined it, and it's something that far exceeds what is generally expressed in art or otherwise in our time. So I'm going to leave you with this image, which is from one of my more recent works in 2021. And if you who know the creative process know that it's not a linear process. Changes happen slowly. They grow in fits and starts and circles around. So the changes that started in my pilgrimages are still manifesting in my work today. Thank you.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you, Alexandra. First, we're going to invite Rita.
Voilà.
In 2014, on the road from Paris to Santiago de Compostela, I returned to the same two gestures each day. The first, at each stage, I had my credential, my pilgrim's passport, stamped. Official proof that I had passed through on paper. The second, I shaped a merelle, a coquille Saint-Jacques with a glue gun, imprinting the warm, transparent material with flecks of earth from the place. The material bearing my signature. I passed it on to the next stage, offering it to whoever welcomed me. I photographed it against the landscapes and the faces. A seal pressed onto the reel. Gift and attestation in a single gesture. 12 years later, I am preparing Mnemosyne, 100 days of walking from Paris to Nafplio for a 10-minute performance on arrival. In 2014, I wrote, I am traced, therefore I trace. I reverse it. I trace, therefore I am traced. Mnemosyne moves both gestures from the exterior toward the interior. The passport becomes the beating of my heart. It is no longer a stamp that attests to my passage. It is my body. A mountain pass at 1,000 meters costs thousands of beats. The body keeps the accounts I forget. I no longer count the kilometers. I count what the walk costs my body, the vital cost, my proof of presence. The merelle, the offering, in turn becomes a map of heartbeats, one I give to whoever opens their door to me that evening. My preuve d'adresse or visiting card. At each stage, an artificial intelligence overlays the line of my pulse onto the curve of the path. Where they diverge, it shows me what I did not feel in the moment. It does not write in my place. An orthosis, one that supports my perception but does not replace it. This is what I call cardiocartography, turning what the body pays into narrative. Mnemosyne measures with rigor, partly because it accepts the limits of measurement. During an earlier performance in Croatia, I came across a farmer in his field. We were separated by the whole width of the plowed land, too far for a word. He raised his hand before I did. I answered with the same gesture. Nothing circulated, no data, no proof. I did not record my heartbeat in that instant. It is the measurement missing from all my measurements. I can locate that moment, date it, describe it, but no description will exhaust what it meant. Mnemosyne documents the conditions under which an event appears, never the totality of its meaning. This is why I measure. Not to prove that everything is measurable, but the opposite. Because a part of the path will always escape. The stumps said where I had passed. The heartbeats will say what that passage cost me. On July 29th, I set out to count what can be counted only once. I measure what the body pays, not what the path means.
Voilà.
Okay, Peter, it's your turn.
Yeah, I've just said that two wonderful and fascinating personal impressions of walking. And I'd like to add to them by addressing the theme of pilgrimage, really as a walk that I once did in Georgia, which is the country which I, as you know, I know very well, up a traditional pilgrimage route to the top of a mountain. It's a very interesting experience because you have Georgian pilgrims who are walking up to the church at the top, and then you have hikers who are out for a day's hike. You have children, and you have very old people, and it's 800 meters of elevation. It's a very severe walk for a lot of people. It can take 2 hours, it can take 5 hours. And the thing that you notice along the way, and I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute, is the growing elevation and the landscape all around you. In fact, let's start that right now. Okay, so this is Kazbegi in Georgia. It's quite near the Russian border. Now you can see on the top, on the top right-hand side, you can see Mount Kazbek. It's a 5,000-meter peak, but crouched before it, almost like a sort of a supplicant, couple of supplicants, is this 14th century church, and there are a number of routes up to it. This is not the hike I'm going to tell you about, but I just want to introduce the whole theme of pilgrimage and how important the church is and how important the image of God is to Georgian people. And they built this in the 14th century in a little tiny country which has been invaded so many times. And they built this church to preserve the image of Georgia and the self-image of Georgia. And when the invading armies came, they would take all the treasures out of the church and they would race them up to a second church right up in the top of the mountain at 4,000 meters. And then when the armies left, they would bring them down again. So that is right. Now I'm going to see if we can do the next one. This is the same picture, but in the winter, just so you can see the drama of this country and really the secret of how it has survived for so long and how it's kept its identity, and how pilgrimage, I think, is a very important part. And as we go further into the Caucasus, further down the road from this Mount Kazbek, you will see these these are watchtowers, actually built in the Middle Ages, waiting for the next set of armies to come. We go a little bit further, here. And this is now on the right-hand side of the picture. You will see this is just on the other side of the Greater Caucasus. Just as you're starting to go down, you'll see the main pilgrimage site. Now, the pilgrimage is called Lomisa. And sorry, there we go. There it is. It's a little church perched on the top of a mountain at 2,200 meters. You can see the path going up to it. And once a year, around about the summer solstice, you can get about 10 to 20,000 people going up to this little tiny matchbox-like church, which was built in the 7th century on top of a mountain. And they go up there to connect not only to their images of God, which of course is a Georgian Orthodox God, they're very deeply Christian, and this church has been restored a number of times and recently restored, and they go up there to carry out a ritual, which I'll describe shortly. This is the bottom where the pilgrimage starts. And if you can see a small car park there ready for pilgrims. And there are no signs because they don't really want to encourage tourists. They're very happy for us, more serious tourists, to come up, and but they don't encourage mass tourism, which is a very good idea. And if you go during the week, you won't find too many people, but it's about the only hike in my hiking book on Georgia where you'll find more Georgians than Westerners hiking these mountains. Because if you see on the right-hand side, this is fairly near the top. They're going to the church. And this is the kind of thing you will bump into along the way. There's beautiful little cameos of flowers and rocks and lichens and the way that they create these extraordinary natural paintings. So for those of us who are not Christians, but who are, or let's say part Christian, but not as serious as the Georgians are, these are also sort of spiritual elements of the walk. This is a young Georgian man. He's near the top, and you can see he's carrying an icon. It's an icon of St. George, and it is a church to St. George. And as they go up, they make wishes, and they are actually praying as they walk. It's for him, it's probably not too difficult to walk, but for, let's say, his parents or some of the elderly people, they can take up to 5 hours, and it's really quite a difficult walk. But the process of the walk, the concentration on the image of God, and in some cases, the actual carrying of the image of God or the representative of God, as in this case, it really deepens the experience. And when you go to, if you go, and you're most welcome to come and join me on this hike up into Lomisa, you will hopefully experience the same thing. Now, this is inside the church at the top, and you can see this very dramatic looking St. George icon. Underneath it is a thick and very heavy chain, and you pick up the chain and you walk around this icon, which is a pillar which is in the center of the church, which holds it up. You walk around it 3 times, and then you put it back down again. So, and this ritual has been going on for over 1,000 years, and nobody quite knows why. But in a way, it doesn't matter, because you've climbed up to this extraordinary church, which is, we don't know how it survived on top of this mountain for so long, but it has. You've climbed up there, and you feel humbled by your experience. At least I certainly did, and everyone that I came with did, even though they weren't pilgrims. But by the time you get to the church, you've become a pilgrim, and then you're greeted by this extraordinary icon, and it's a very powerful experience. You can see that the women, they all put on their headscarves, and they also carry the chain around. And then, of course, you go down, and as you go down, as we went down, this was last year, the thunderstorms come, and as they come, you get glimpses of the sublime. And so, really, it's a pilgrimage that caters for all kinds of experience, of human experience. The Georgians run away from this, but I, being a fan of the Romantics, love it. So I'll stop there, and with an invitation for you all to come and visit Georgia.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Peter. That's really fascinating. And certainly the ritual at the end of carrying the chain around the icon. Anyway, so we're going to kind of start with a conversation between the panelists. Peter, you did mention that you had a couple of questions that you wanted to pitch in straight away. So do please start us off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very interested in Rita. Do I pronounce your name correctly? Rita?
Rida.
Rita, sorry. The idea of the body is something that interests me a lot because I've reached a certain age where if I don't use the body, it will deteriorate, and you use it regularly. So we have hiking, which is something that I do, but I don't find it's enough because you exercise the same muscles again and again. So I do a lot of dance. I do a lot of dance around here in London and in Tbilisi now. And looking at your images, hearing what you said, and then looking at your images and your awareness of your heart in relation to the landscape is something that I think dancers are very conscious of. They don't write, but they just move in response to other people or to music or to landscape. And I'm just wondering, how do you let's say react to someone who responds to landscape as in movement as opposed to just words?
Alors, je vais traduire un peu pour toi,
Oui.
Rita. Rita. Peter a dit que il a vu avec ton travail le corps est très, très important. Et pour lui aussi, le pèlerinage, le marche, en fait, c'est important pour le corps parce que plus qu'on âge, plus que le corps, je ne sais pas, déchire ou détériore, voilà. Mais il disait que dans ton travail en particulier, le cœur est très important. Et il disait que lui, en fait, pour lui, c'est pas assez juste pour marcher. Il danse aussi. En fait, il fait beaucoup de danse. Et le cœur, le battement de cœur, c'est quelque chose qui est très important pour les danseuses.
Mm.
Et il a demandé, c'est pour toi, pourquoi le cœur est très important? Est-ce que c'est par rapport de le mouvement et ta relation avec le paysage, en fait?
Mm.
Mm.
En fait, le cœur, évidemment, il est intimement lié au corps, au sens, quand un corps fait un effort, en tout cas dans des marches, de longues marches, le fait de marcher en plaine ou marcher en montagne, on peut marcher la même distance, mais ce n'est pas le même effort. Et le cœur est la meilleure des mesures pour mesurer le coût vital. C'est ce que le corps paye. Le battement du cœur est l'indication et la mesure pour dire ce que le corps paye. Et donc le battement du cœur est vraiment l'attestation la plus proche pour dire l'effort. Enfin, voilà. Est-ce que
Et-
c'est, est-ce que c'est
et-
clair?
oui, mais est-ce que, pas, vous avez parlé de les montagnes et tout ça, mais est-ce que ça, c'est la seule relation entre le cœur et les paysages, ou est-ce qu'il y a autre chose, en fait?
C'est pas la seule relation, c'est vraiment c'est ce qui marque le rythme. Le cœur, c'est le rythme même du chemin, au fond.
So
Euh,
I don't know if you got any of that, Peter, but Rita was saying that for him, the reason that the heart is important, it's about effort. And, maybe a little bit like what you were saying about this chemin, the path up to the church, that for some people, depending on their health or their age, or the experience is very intense climbing up to this church. Maybe if you're young, you can skip up there. But if you're, for everyone, it's more intense than just, a regular walk. So there's a relationship of like what the body has to pay to get to the church. And even the ritual with the chain afterwards, it's another sense of the body having to pay a price, and that's part of what the pilgrimage is. I don't know if that answers your question at all, but Yeah, but there's a relationship between what the body has to pay, and that's what, in a sense, makes it a pilgrimage. So for Rita, the measurement is the beating of his heart, and sometimes that will be going up a mountain, or and in a sense that intensity will be measured by he has a heart monitor. So and that creates the relationship between the movement and the landscape in a sense. Yeah.
Alexandra, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, just to sort of expand out for what you were saying, on what you were thinking, but I do think this common thread throughout pilgrimages and also in Rita's work and my work, and maybe anybody who starts to deal with, shall we say, pilgrimage, is what we call embodiment, right? And especially any kind of religious process in a pre-modern era, in particular a pre-Protestant era, has had an embodied component, and pilgrimage is kind of one of the
Excusez-moi, je suis désolé. Sorry, 1 minute. Pardon.
one of those quintessential acts. So I think when I walked my pilgrimage, I probably was keyed in to be receptive to that, and also to be receptive to the concept, even that physical movement, like walking, could change me and my photography in a way that maybe another person wouldn't be, because I had had previous experience, in my case in West Africa, looking at very old forms of like Sufi scholarship, right? And in those traditions, you have things like
Sorry.
people write passages of the Quran on a board and then drink it to heal parts of their bodies, right? I mean, so when you're this kind of relationship between a text, a movement, a physical act, incorporating it all into your body at the same time, right? It's a normal way of thinking for pre-modern religions, but it's actually a very alien way of thinking in modern times.
You know that in the Caucasus we have a lot of Sufis. Not how can I put it? Obviously, but concealed. And the most famous text in Georgia is a poem by a poet called Shota Rustaveli, and some people suggest that he was a Sufi. And the idea that the connection that Sufis make between art and spirituality, I think, is very interesting. And I think you can see traces of it coming through into the iconography in Georgia. It's adapted, and it's changed, and there are dance traditions now in Georgia which are completely secular, but they were originally, of course, spiritual as well. And it's something that it interests me, and hiking up those 800 meters, you're very conscious of your heartbeat, and you're very conscious of your body, and after a certain age, you're conscious of finality. So all of those things seem to combine to make the experience much deeper, if we allow ourselves to do it. And I speak for myself, but if you see the variety of people going up that hill, you can see a huge variety of very deep personal experiences in the pilgrimage process, and it's well worth seeing, I think.
So I wanted to bring something out in particular to show Rita, and again on this idea of what is written, right, from the walk, just because most people know about the Compostela, the record of your walk on the Camino de Santiago, but actually there's equally, if not more ancient form of the walk becoming a book from the Shikoku pilgrimage. And this goes back centuries. This is not a modern phenomenon, but when you do the Shikoku pilgrimage, at the beginning, you buy an empty book. They make them quite nice looking, and the pages will be blank. And then at each temple, you get a stamp and a calligraphy, right? So that by the end, you have 88 of the stamps and the calligraphy proving you went to each 88 of the 88 temples. But it's more than that, actually. And I think in a way, I'm curious if the Compostela used to have this power in Christianity. I've never, in all my accounts of the Camino, I've never read of it. But in Shikoku, this book has power. So if somebody's sick and you take it and you put it next to them or you pass it over their body 3 times, it'll help them get better. So the physical creation, right, that came out of every pilgrim's walk, whether they're an artist or not, you get one of these at the end as long as you pay for your stamps, becomes a holy object. And this is my holy object.
Rita, est-ce que tu as compris ce qu'Alexandra a dit?
Non, tu vas me le dire.
Alexandra a
Ok,
montré,
merci.
oui, mais elle a montré un livre.
Oui, le livre avec les tampons, je crois, oui.
Oui, dans le pèlerinage en Japon. Et
Japon,
disait
Japon, ouais,
qu'en fait, il avait cette tradition de le livre avec les
oui.
tampons, les calligraphies et tout ça. Mais c'était intéressant parce que à la fin, en fait, le livre soi-même devient un objet sacré. Et
Oui.
en fait, avec un pouvoir. Et si quelqu'un est malade, par exemple, tu prends le livre, tu peux passer le livre quelquefois, 3 fois à travers le corps de quelqu'un et ça peut l'aider en fait. Il y a un pouvoir sacré dans le livre. C'est une
Oui.
trace, oui, voilà.
Oui, mais pour répondre à ça, il y avait quelque chose que je trouvais intéressant pour répondre aux livres. Contrairement aux livres, moi, les crédentiels, j'ai pas utilisé leur pouvoir en fait. Le, mon carnet de les crédentials de Compostelle, j'aurais pu utiliser. Peut-être qu'ils avaient des pouvoirs. J'ai pas essayé. En revanche, il y avait un truc que je trouvais qui était intéressant, c'est que quand je marchais, les gens avaient un livre d'or et ils accueillaient les pèlerins. Et quand tu écrivais sur ce livre, moi je pense que ce livre-là, que les gens, où ils accueillaient la parole ou l'accueil des gens, je le trouvais beaucoup plus intéressant finalement que la crédentiale. Euh, les livres que les gens qui accueillent le corps, la parole de l'autre, je les trouvais beaucoup plus intéressantes que aller chercher la parole, aller chercher de la magie et cueillir de la magie. En fait, en termes de livres, c'est les livres d'or des gens qui t'accueillent qui m'intéressaient beaucoup plus.
Um, Alexandra, I know you understand French, but would you
Si,
like me
elle
to
comprend, je
translate
crois.
for the rest of the audience who doesn't? Rita was saying that it was very interesting hearing about the Japanese pilgrimage book, and maybe he should have used his passport more. He didn't realize that maybe it would have some power for healing. But he was saying that what he thought was more interesting on his walk to Compostela was actually the visiting book, which he calls the Livre d'Or. I don't know if that translates as a golden book um, in the pilgrimage terminology, but he found this book that the people who welcomed the pilgrims, so the people along the path who accepted pilgrims, they all had visiting books, which the pilgrims who passed through would sign, and he felt that that had a power in a sense, that it was like capturing some of the energy of the passing pilgrims, perhaps.
Yeah, just to respond to that quickly, I mean, I think one of the reasons I wanted to walk the Shikoku pilgrimage after the Camino, right, was because I'm always interested in this cross-cultural comparison. That's also part of my background. And so I was like, well, I walked the Camino and I saw these changes in me. So what of it was the Camino and what of it was Spain or Europe? and what of it is universal, right, to walking and pilgrimage. But one of the great things about the Shikoku pilgrimage, especially if you read on it, I really also, I have put these next to me. This is the second one. I won't be showing another book. To bring out Oliver Statler's Japanese Pilgrimage is sort of the go-to book of the Shikoku pilgrimage, to learn about it in English. But a lot of the old legends and sort of mythologies of it still exist, right? Like the idea that the book of calligraphy is powerful for other things, for healing in a holy book, but also the idea that pilgrims are avatars of the saint. So when you walk the Shikoku pilgrimage, and I did, I wore the white cloth mantle. I didn't wear the hat because that gets in the way of my camera, but I had my staff. You have to have this staff, a real staff, not a walking stick, on that pilgrimage, and your mantle, because these are all symbols. And in fact, the white mantle is a symbol that you're dead, right? Because white in Japan is the color of death. And when you walk the pilgrimage, you have given up life temporarily, and you may die on the pilgrimage, of course. It was quite likely in the pre-modern times. And you are walking in Shikoku, which is the land of death. Shi being in Japanese death, koku, land, and Shi also being 4, which is also the number of death of the 4 provinces. So anyway, these symbols are there, like really strong on the Shikoku pilgrimage, including the idea, as I said, that as a pilgrim, you are an avatar of the saint. And that's why people give you gifts and give you osetai, and you have to accept it unless it's dangerous for some reason, because it is the saint accepting it as well as you, right? And they're not giving it to you, they're giving it to the saint as an offering to be accepted. So this idea you have, Rita, that the pilgrim, it maybe even has power in signing the leaf door, is exactly correct, right?
Alexandra, can I ask you, how different did you feel at the end of your pilgrimage from the beginning? Was there a process that you were aware of, and any changes that took place during the pilgrimage, and any sort of connections between the symbols that you were carrying or wearing and your difference in your personal relationship to the landscape and yourself?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I felt different. After the first pilgrimage, it was surprising. After the next 2, it was expected in a way. And I mean, people who walk the pilgrimage in sections, like a week at a time, I think that's totally understandable, and many people have to do it that way. The unfortunate thing about it is there is something about a month. And I think, because Andrew, I think you too have probably walked to Santiago, maybe the same year as me from your email. It's funny to think we're on the same path, in the same year. But the first week is the week of learning. You learn to be a pilgrim, whether you're one officially or not. I think Anne had a question about that. You learn the ins and outs, like where to get food and how to get lodging and how to take care of your blisters, because that's when they generally appear. The second week, things get real, right? Things start to get real. The second week, like if you've had blisters, you're really dealing with it. And if you've started to get tendonitis or knee aches, you're just moving through as best you can. It's not surprising if the weather gets bad, or on the Camino de Frances, the landscape does that. You go through the meseta, right, in the second week, and that's like the desert, right? Often you've separated from your companions at that point, whatever. I started each one by myself, but you see it happening to other people. The third week, you're starting to get a bit better at managing everything, and it's flowing more smoothly, and maybe your blisters and other things are healing. And then the fourth week is kind of nirvana. And in fact, the Shikoku pilgrimage, with the 4 provinces you go through at roughly that rate, they again talk about it explicitly. Yeah. And Kochi Ken is Kochi Ken. You know, that's where you're like gonna be really lonely and it's gonna suck. So that's, I mean, it's interesting, right? That a lot of these big pilgrimages, the landscape itself reflects the process that the body actually goes through physically within those 4 weeks.
Mm. And how did you feel changed psychologically?
Well, by the end of the first pilgrimage, I knew my photography was changing. In fact, I have to say, before doing this talk, because I became quite I was thinking about it a lot, I went back and looked through the unedited material from the Camino de Santiago I have from 2009, and I realized I need to do a book for real on that. That's a completely different edit from anything I realized before. And it's only now 20 years or more later that I realized that everything, the whole transformation is there already in 2009 in the photography in ways that my photography consciously is only now began to show in the last 5 years. It's actually already there in 2009. So I sense that kind of instinctively, right? By the end of the first pilgrimage. But I still had so much to learn, right? The interpreter in me had to learn how to read about pilgrimage, how to walk and go on other walks, to bring it to my conscious mind so I could understand what had happened consciously.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question to throw out, especially for Rita. We discussed this a bit before, which was, what about this difference between things happening on the pilgrimage and after the pilgrimage? You know, I talked about the changes that continue into the future, and I'm curious about that happening in his work too.
Oh, Annemarie, you're on mute.
Marie.
Oui. Alors, Alexandra a demandé, c'est une question qu'en fait elle a posée quand tu te rencontrais au début. Elle parlait de, c'est quoi en fait, pour toi le procès, mais en fait je vais traduire juste un tout petit peu avant parce qu'Alexandra a parlé un peu de, en fait, sur le pèlerinage. En fait, elle a parlé de quelque chose que toi, je sais que tu as dit aussi, qu'après un mois, en fait, ça prend 2 mois, en fait, de devenir un pèlerin, elles disent. Because Rita has a expression that after a month you become inhabitant of the road. I know that because I read something he wrote about that. But Alexandra was interested in the process that happens after your walk, after the pilgrimage. For you.
Tu voulais me po- tu
Pour
me
toi,
poses
le
la
procès,
question.
qu'est-ce qui se passe après le marche pour toi? Alors, est-ce que c'est aussi important pour toi après le marche? Alors, les changements, les transformations, ça continue après le marche.
Bah, comme je disais à l'introduction, longtemps je pensais qu'il fallait il fallait marcher et écrire, mais en fait, c'est la marche qui fait l'écriture, en fait. C'est la marche qui fait l'écriture. Et en fait, c'est toutes les traces de la marche qui continuent en fait à produire éventuellement l'écriture après. C'est bien après. Donc, en fait, avant de marcher pour le projet, on commence à marcher et on marche. Quand on a fini à marcher, on continue à marcher. La marche, elle continue autrement en fait. Mais on continue à marcher, mais autrement. C'est les traces qui continuent à marcher. C'est les traces du corps qui continuent à marcher. Euh, la marche se fait avant, pendant et après. La marche, elle se déploie sur trois moments différents pour moi. L'après-manche, c'est la projection, le corps, le désir se projette. La marche, c'est l'épreuve du corps et du cœur dans le réel. Après la marche, c'est les traces de la marche qui continuent à marcher. C'est les trois niveaux, les trois plans de la marche me concernant. Je sais pas si-
Okay, I know, Alexandra, you understand that, but I'll just quickly sum up. Rita was saying that there's sort of 3 stages really that you prepare for the walk, and that's partly walking because you're imagining yourself walking, you're planning the walk, there's the desire to walk, all of that. Then when you're actually doing the pilgrimage or the walk, that's the body actually, as what you were talking about, the idea of the embodiment, you're experiencing that, that's the body paying the price, or, experiencing that intensity, I think, which was an interesting word that you used, Alexandra. The intensity of the physical experience that makes you notice a cafe doorway or a tree that you'd never noticed before. That's the kind of physical intensity that you're experiencing. But then after the walk, those traces are still acting in you. They're very active and they are still changing you. So you're still walking in a way for a long time, and it's the traces that are walking in you. And so he used to think that it was, you walk first and then you write. And then maybe in your case, you go and you take some photos and then you develop them, or however, in the digital age, you choose them. But he's saying and which is very similar to what you said as well, Alexander. It's in the process of the walk and that physical experience of the walk that your actual photographs changed, but then that continues to change your photographs afterwards as well.
J'aurais une question.
Oui.
J'aurais une question à Alexandra et à John. C'est une question simple, mais c'est une question qui m'obsède en fait, qui fait partie de simple. C'est-à-dire, quand on raconte un chemin, tu vois, quand on raconte un chemin, que doit le récit au corps qui a marché? C'est-à-dire, quel est le coup? Que doit le récit au corps qui a marché? Tu sais, tu connais mon truc avec la question du coup. Qu'est-ce que
Oui.
c'est? Que doit le récit quand on raconte, que doit le récit
What
au
does ah oui, que doit le récit? So
ouais.
what
Quand
does
on raconte un chemin,
oui. Mhm.
voilà, quand on raconte un chemin, que doit le récit, donc ce qui a été raconté, au corps qui a marché? Quel est le dû? Parce que finalement, on paye avec le corps. Le corps, quelle est la place de l'effort du corps, en fait, que doit le récit au
Le
corps?
récit. Oui.
Oui, quand on dit l'histoire, en fait, qu'on raconte,
Mhm.
quelle empreinte elle a du corps?
Mhm.
Qu'est-ce qu'elle prend du corps qui a marché? Qu'est-ce qu'elle lui doit? C'est ça, je la pose à John et Alexandra, puisque les deux. Je ne sais pas si c'est clair, hein, mais
Oui, Alexandra, did you understand the question? It's sort of quite conceptual, but he's saying when you're telling the story of the walk or the pilgrimage afterwards, what does the story owe, in a sense, um, to the body and to the experience? How is it imprinted? How is the story that you tell imprinted with the bodily experience of the walk? And this is a question also for you, Peter.
So I sort of interpret this in two ways, maybe because that expression in French isn't too familiar to me, droit le récit, right? One way I'm hearing the question is more theoretically, right? Like, where does the act of the body emerge, right? You might say in the work. Like, that's one way of interpreting it. And the other way I'm interpreting what he's asking is what is owed to the body,
Yeah.
like for its work, for its work that it gave.
Yeah.
Now I'm kind of want to start with a second part, because it maybe in a way it seems harder, but in the context of pilgrimage, it's actually the answer in a way is quite simple. It's that, well, that was a sacrifice, you owe nothing. Like, sacrifice in religion is something we don't talk about a lot now, because people don't want to sacrifice. But sacrifice in religion is something that is, again, completely normal and expected and required in the pre-modern way of thinking things, right? And if often you're supposed to sacrifice your whole life. The body is owed nothing. It's supposed to give everything if it wants to get anything of the spiritual experience, right? But at the same time, it's through all of these non-rational experiences that happen to us throughout pilgrimage and other means happen through the body. Yeah, I've never heard of one happening through the internet. That maybe it's possible.
Yes.
So, even what I talked about in my last journal entry, that was actually, and I didn't even realize it till recently when I began reading about like shamanistic experiences and other ways of reaching non-rational ways of consciousness, that heavy drumming is actually a very common one. So I was unknowingly and put into that position with a receptive mind, of course, after walking 3 weeks to achieve this other plane of perception in my pilgrimage in Japan through the heavy drumming. So one answer to your question, and then I want to hear what Peter's saying in the context of a cognisis, is that there's nothing owed the body. The body owes everything through its sacrifice.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I like the idea of sacrifice because the thing that really interests me the most about pilgrimage, I think, is its ability to inspire people into a sense of humility, um, and sometimes deep humility. I mean, if you look at the face of that man carrying the icon of St. George up the mountain, um, you could feel that his sense of self had changed, and he wasn't just concerned with immediate issues. He was seeing something bigger, and the way that the self can be transformed, which is the point of my previous question to you, I think is fascinating. And any way that it can be transformed actually is interesting. But on a pilgrimage, and particularly the one that you've described, Alexandra, the very particularly after week 4, something happens in the body which affects the mind and therefore the self. And the self, and it's also a part, as you probably know, of the Sufi tradition as well, that the idea that the self no longer exists in a way that it had done, that it used to, so that you see yourself differently. And at the end of the hike, or at the end of the pilgrimage, you're able, you've humbled yourself, which means that you've seen yourself differently and you've learned something, and it's something that you can then pass on to other people. But it's the thing that I've always got out of this, and I won't tell you now, but I did have a very, very humbling experience when I went to try and climb a holy mountain in India, and they refused to let me in after I traveled right across for a week across southern India to get there. And it was that experience, the crushing of my idea of myself, which actually was probably the most memorable moment of my entire 7 months in South India. And it was a pilgrimage experience. It wasn't as structured as the way that I can see that has happened and that happens in Japan, but it had a very similar psychological effect.
I don't know. Do you mind if there's a question in the chat, which I think is quite an interesting one for everyone. Should we introduce some of the?
Yeah, please do, Annemarie. Yeah.
I don't know, Claudia, do you want to ask the question directly, or shall I just read out your question? If I don't hear from you, I'll just read it out.
Tu peux traduire un tout petit peu, Anne-Marie? Merci.
Oui, wait, okay. So Claudia's question to all of you, I think, and I'll translate it for you, reader, is she says, out of genuine curiosity, if someone undertakes a pilgrimage rooted in a faith which they do not practice or believe in, how does one reconcile that? I'm particularly interested in how people of that faith feel about it. Do they see it simply as another way of engaging with the pilgrimage, or could it be viewed as appropriating a religious practice or even something like blasphemy? And this is actually relevant to all of you because I don't know, actually, I don't know, Peter, whether are the Georgians, what type of Christianity are they? Are they Orthodox Christians?
Yeah, they're Orthodox Georgian. It's a good question for Georgia because some churches, it depends where you are, um, will insist that any visitor into the church will have to be covered. For instance, men can't walk in wearing shorts, and they will actually have shawls outside, so that you conform to them and not they to you and your cameras and your sort of rather uninformed curiosity. And that whether it's don't think blasphemy comes into it, and appropriation I don't really think comes into it either, but they're asking you to change. If you're going to go into their church, and for instance the church that you saw at the top of the mountain, I wasn't wearing shorts, but my women friends, they had to wear hair coverings, and you just that very action, I like it, because it means that we, from our rich and powerful and well-equipped West, um, are having to become a little bit more humble, in the various different churches and rituals, that certainly you see right across Georgia now.
Okay, I'm going to just translate it now for Rita because actually it applies to you, Rita. En fait, c'est une question qui, parce que toi, tu as fait le Compostelle, mais toi, tu n'es pas chrétien, tu as d'origine musulmane, même si tu ne pratiques pas.
Je suis parti ni en tant que musulman,
Oui,
ni
non, mais en fait, tu n'es pas religieux du tout, mais la question, c'est si tu suives un pèlerinage d'une religion que tu ne pratiques pas, comment tu
oui.
peux réconcilier, comment tu le vois en fait? Si tu pratiques, tu pratiques c'est une pratique de chrétien, de les chrétiens de faire un pèlerinage, mais tu n'es pas chrétien. Est-ce que tu penses que c'est une forme d'appropriation ou même de blasphème? Ou comment, en fait, les chrétiens, tu vois, comme un pèlerin qui n'est pas chrétien. Est-ce que tu as eu des discussions sur ça? Est-ce que les gens prennent ça bien ou mal que tu fais cet sacrifice?
En fait, moi je le fais pas en termes de sacrifice, mais quand tu fais le chemin, il y a des sentiments ou des sensations universelles. Que ce soit les chrétiens, les païens, il y a la notion d'espérance, il y a la notion d'effort, il y a la notion de désir, il y a beaucoup de notions qu'on peut parfaitement détacher de la religion en tant que telle, qu'une religion peut porter et que tu peux parfaitement les porter en étant d'une autre religion ou même en étant athée. Donc de ce point de vue-là, pour moi, ce sont des qualités humaines en fait qui passent par et au contraire en fait c'était à partir de ça c'était des moyens de rentrer en connexion avec des gens très différents auxquels je partage pas la religion enfin ou dans le sens où je ne suis pas croyant mais je partage ce qui engage dans leur espérance dans leur effort pour certains du sacrifice pour d'autres il y a une éthique dans la marche euh, et tout ça transcende en fait l'appartenance religieuse. Donc pour moi, il y a aucun, aucune contradiction. J'ai marché. Alors j'ai pris ce chemin-là parce que symboliquement, j'ai pu avoir une crédentielle. Donc elle n'était pas attribuée juste aux chrétiens. Donc j'ai pu rentrer dans le chemin avec ça. Et puis le chemin, il était finalement beaucoup plus varié qu'on le pense. Mais cela dit, on partage, beaucoup de croyants portent des sentiments qui ont une dimension universelle, qui transcendent leur religion. Et à partir de là, on peut discuter.
Okay, I'll let you answer in a moment, Alexandra, but I'll just translate a bit. Claudia, so Rita is saying that for him, there's certain processes involved in a pilgrimage that are universal, and feelings, processes like hope, effort, the desire for transformation. And because these are kind of universal human experiences, that in a sense he's entering into a connection with those people, even the people who are, they may be of the Christian faith in this case, or maybe you in Japan, Alexandra, you're entering into the Zen Buddhism, I presume. So that process of the ritual, and even perhaps the passport, which is like a universal symbol of crossing borders and connecting to other places, that makes it, in a sense, you're sharing a connection, even if you are not of that religion. So it's not that most of the people on the, even the Christian people, they understand that you're sharing this universal connection. So, Alexandra, I don't know if you have a...
Yeah, a very interesting question, which in a way I think, strangely enough, my experience on the Camino is more relevant, but I think there's a question there about Shikoku, since let people know less about it. There's fundamentalist branches of all religions. Let's accept that. It's not just Christianity. And they're fundamentalist Buddhists, but at this time in Japan, the way Buddhism and Shintoism is practiced is very syncretic, right? That wasn't the case before World War II, but it's the case now. And so people are very open now for foreigners or non-Buddhist practitioners to walk the Shikoku pilgrimage. And I never on the Shikoku pilgrimage felt a sense of refusal. The only time I might have felt that is like there were a few monks walking the pilgrimage, and some of them were like, "Don't take a picture of me," but that's fine. So I did meet some other Westerners who like felt, "Oh, I don't think I should chant." But I decided after about a week that I would do the chanting, because I was like, that's an interesting experience and I want to see what it does to me. Again, this question of what does the physical do to me, right? What does chanting do to you? And I know I chanted really badly, compared to the very practiced way other people did it. But nobody ever was negative to me about that. Especially in Japan, I mean, maybe not now because they're kind of tired of foreigners right now. But back then in 2010, to have a young foreigner who was clearly interested in the culture, I'm speaking Japanese a little, fairly well enough to have conversations. And I'm going all in to walk it, which not everyone walks it in Shikoku, and doing their best to be respectful, wearing the clothes and all the rest. People appreciated that, actually. I'm not saying that would be the case everywhere in every culture, but in Japan, at that time, that was the case. And frankly, the sutras are all in Sanskrit. So if you don't understand them, it's not because they're in Japanese. The Japanese don't understand them either. Actually. So, and I probably knew a lot more about the pilgrimage from research than the young Japanese pilgrims I met. That's the irony also of the modern era. On the Camino, as those who've walked it know, even as many people have a Christian background, most people aren't necessarily practitioners. The number of serious practitioners increase dramatically when you get within a week within Santiago. And before then, they're pretty slim on the ground. The times when people, I say it came up as an issue is one, when you get your credencial. I think there were rumors that they would actually ask you if you were a Christian. I'm not sure if I was asked. I'm Protestant in as much as I'm religious, right? The Protestants did away with all the pilgrimages and stuff. So in a way, that's just as bad as being a non-Christian of another faith, I think. But the other moment, though, which happened on the last pilgrimage, which I thought was quite interesting, is when I was walking in France for a few days. Once in a while in the distance, I'd see a group of fundamentalist Muslims walking. And they were clearly fundamentalist Muslims because of how they were dressed, right? The beards and the cut of the pants and everything. And they made the other pilgrims super nervous. Now, I've spent my time in Muslim countries, so I was like, huh, okay. And they were also trying to get converts towards Islam. And I thought that was quite interesting because the Camino is in a way notoriously open towards people of minor faith as a path, and it's the walk, right? That the walk and getting your stamp that gets you into the club. Not like if you were baptized Catholic. But the fact that other people were so nervous and tense about these fundamentalist other pilgrims and what they were doing was quite interesting.
I want to give the panelists the last word, but Anne de Forest, you've peppered the chat with a few questions and things, and I wondered whether you wanted to perhaps choose even the first one or another one that you've written and ask the question, and we get some response from the panelists on that.
Well, I feel like the first one was actually answered in the conversation, which was this idea that can the route make you a pilgrim even if you set out not particularly intending to be one, which sort of struck me when Peter said by the time you get to the church, you become a pilgrim. But I feel like that this whole conversation has kind of been about that theme. And so I feel like that has been answered in very interesting ways. I did have a question for Alexandra that's really more specifically about the book, because I was really fascinated about that and the calligraphy, which is, does the calligraphy mean any, like is it actual writing that somebody could read, like a word or a prayer, or is it something that's more a physical gesture in the book?
Yeah, the calligraphy is the name of the temple. And as for whether it's more or less literal, it will depend on the
Oh,
the person at the temple who's writing it. And some of them are really sort of, I mean, in Japanese or Asian calligraphy, right, as a whole has that phenomenon, right? That it can be written just very clearly and literally, or you can take the same phrase and make it much harder to read, but much more sort of evocative. I'm trying to look for one of the more yeah. So this one's quite interesting, right? Because you can see the form of the pilgrim, right? You have the staff
mm-hmm.
and the head, but technically is the name of the temple, although I couldn't read it if you ask me. Right? So you have both there, and it just depends on who's painting it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I suppose also in response to your original question and also the idea of you're a pilgrim when you arrive that Peter said, I've spent a lot of my life as a foreigner in foreign countries. And then as a documentary photographer looking in from the outside. And I do think that one of the reasons the pilgrimage grabbed me so much was I was in. Despite being an American Protestant by background, right? And by the time I reached Finisterre, it's like, let's go all pagan, let's burn our shoes and our clothes, as you do, as one does there, and feel completely comfortable, participating in this supposedly Catholic but really pagan ritual of burning your things on the beach at the edge of the ocean, right? And I think, what the payment in Rita's terms that allowed me to enter is the walking, right? Like I walked the last 500 miles. You're gonna say I can't do this because of whatever? Sorry. And I think a lot of other people probably feel that way too.
Well, it's Peter, yeah.
Well, I was just going to end really by agreeing with you, and particularly that word you used, which was feeling comfortable, because I remember, when I got to the church for the first time, and you're standing inside it, and there are people all around you lighting candles. Some people are singing. Some people are standing silently before the icon. Some people are really tired and just sitting down. But you're in this room surrounded by art, really. I mean, these all kinds of different styles and shapes of icons and colors. And funny enough, there's even a little shop outside which you can buy them and they can be blessed. But when you buy your icon or you just bring your icon inside as that young man did, and you stand inside the church and you feel um, even though I'm not Orthodox Georgian, you felt a connection with all the people in that room. You felt a connection with their God. Um, and it was a very spiritual feeling, and it was a humble feeling, and it was something that it's something I really enjoy, and I would recommend to other people to do. And it's very simple. You walk into a church, but you take the church seriously on its own terms. It has its own religion, and you have your own religion. But as someone said to me once, a church is a message in stone that a lot of people don't understand. But I think once you stand inside it and you become quiet and respectful, then you start to understand it, and that's where religions can sort of unify themselves. So that's my parting gesture to you all, and thank you very much for a fascinating conversation.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thanks to everyone. As I say, we give each of the panelists the last word, but I think Peter's offered his last word. So, would Annemarie, are you happy for to help Rita give her last word, and Alexandra, then you have the last word, and Annemarie, then you're going to try and sum it all up.
Well, yes. Rita, est-ce que tu as un dernier quelques mots sur la discussion aujourd'hui?
Oui, deux petits mots très, très vite. Bon, avec le peu que j'ai pu entendre, comprendre, en fait, ce que je trouve, ça rejoint ce que tu m'as posé comme question sur le chemin des chrétiens, le chemin de pèlerinage. En fait, il y a autant de chemins de pèlerinage qu'il y a de désirs et de personnes, en fait. Est-ce que les chemins de pèlerinage permettent quelque chose finalement à ce que ça accueille toutes sortes d'espérances, de désirs, d'efforts, de souffrances, de tout ce qu'on veut, c'est une des forces des chemins de pèlerinage, c'est que ça laisse ouvert en fait à toutes sortes d'approches. Ce qu'on a vu, il y a autant d'approches, autant d'approche du chemin que de chemin de pèlerinage. S'il y a quelque chose qui m'intéresse dans le chemin de pèlerinage, enfin, en tout cas, que ce soit Compostelle ou autre, c'est que c'est de l'ouvert absolu pour toutes sortes de désirs, d'espérance, d'efforts, etc. C'est ça qui m'intéresse, voilà, entre autres.
So, just to sum up,
Et merci beaucoup. Voilà. Et, et merci.
Rita was saying that for him, what marks out a pilgrimage route is, in fact, that it's open to all sorts of hope, effort, this desire for transformation, and by paying the effort of your body, you're entering into that experience in a sense. But the pilgrimage path, what makes them interesting is that they are open to anyone who wants to pay that price in a sense, with their hopes and their dreams, but mostly with their bodies, and by walking, that's what makes them interesting. It doesn't really matter what your religion is, you're entering into the process. So there's a universality to that. And also he said thank you.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you, Rita. And Alexandra, your last word?
Yeah, I think coming back to the idea of embodiment, what still interests me about pilgrimage and walking, but pilgrimage because it's so linked to storytelling and sort of morality stories, is that it makes physical our psychology, right? And one thing that anyone who sets out on pilgrimage learns, right? Especially along, you're reading the guidebooks and the advice books, and you know your pack is only supposed to be like something like, I don't know, some percentage of your body weight. Otherwise, you'll have trouble, which is true. But I didn't read that advice, and very quickly on my first pilgrimage, I realized my pack's too heavy. But the reason it was too heavy was because of my camera and all the things that came with the camera. And so I was faced with this decision. Do I get rid of my camera and follow the advice, or do I walk really slow and I suffer and I get stronger, right? And of course, I made the second decision to become strong enough to carry the camera on the pilgrimage and correspondingly to suffer more physically. And I just think that's one of the, I mean, that's why you learn. That's why even someone who sets out not as a pilgrim becomes a pilgrim, because the physical makes the mental and psychological issue real and evident in a way that's hard in everyday life otherwise.
Great, thank you very much. I'll give Annemarie a breather, just about 30 seconds, and I'll say that we'll be reconvening with another event on the first Tuesday in August, and it's the theme of it is communities along the trail. I popped it in the chat. Claudia, who asked the question, will be one of our panelists for that event, and I've had confirmed also that we're going to have Omar Sakra, who is president of the Lebanese Mountain Trail Association and a pilgrimist scholar himself. He's going to be joining us for that event live from Beirut. So fingers crossed he won't be bombed out of smithereens by when that happens, but that's happening on the 4th of August. So we look forward to seeing you there, and a big thank you to our presenters, Rita, Alexandra, and especially to Peter, who came in at the last moment. So thank you for saving the day for us there, and Annemarie, especially to you for all the translation, and Annemarie, you have the tough choice of summing it up. 3 words or 3 expressions.
Three. Okay. Well, that makes my job easier. I think, body, effort, and trace, I think would be the 3 words that I would take from that. And that is really what makes the story, since that was the theme of we didn't talk very clearly about storytelling, but I think the story comes from the body, the effort, and then the trace that it's left.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone. And thanks especially to Annemarie. She's worked doubly hard than everyone else. And we'll see you again in a month's time.